So the penultimate session of this festival is a short one, and I hope it's an interesting one. Sriram, recently, as you know, I earn my bread by practicing as a practicing historian, and I read a lot of dull historiographical surveys. I read a survey of urban history works by a Dartmouth historian called Doug Haynes. In a 30-page essay, he reviews nearly 300 monographs of urban history of India. And my pride at being a Chennaiite was seriously dented to find barely 2 or 3 works on Chennai in that entire survey. And the most recent work which he had surveyed was written some 40-50 years ago by Susan Lewandowski. Why do you think we don't have enough histories of Chennai?
See, my view is that you do have books on Chennai, and we have been lucky in terms of the fact that our colonial masters did write quite a bit about our city, starting with H.D. Love and Talboys Wheeler and all of them. But what is really saddening is that today's Tamil books are essentially translations of all those books. People are not looking at what is available in Tamil or in Telugu and what is available within their own backyard, so to speak. The other thing is the great dullness with which we kind of present our history.
Mea culpa.
In fact, I wouldn't put you in that bracket at all, because in my view, I mean, after Mr. S. Muthaya, my interest in the history of the city really came about with your books. Like, in those days, there was no coffee and Songsters of the Crossroads, about which I'm going to ask you a couple of questions later. But the point is that our biography especially is always na bruyat satyam apriyam. If there is something that is harsh, don't write about it. So, you know, all biographies will start with the fact that, you know, the father and mother didn't have children and then they went to a temple. Oh, but that's pretty painful subject at this point of time, so we won't bring it up. And then the child was born and then, you know, he shaved every day and then he was poor. He has to be poor in order to make it an interesting subject for biography. Then God comes and gives darshanam.
And also it is always a humble village,
Absolutely.
A small village.
Absolutely. And there'll be an evil brother or an evil king who will get a stomachache at an appropriate time. Always a stomachache. And then God will come and say that you have to fall at this man's feet and then your stomachache will be cured. And that's how history is really taught. But in my opinion, there are lots of interesting stories about people that really make for the history of the city.
Absolutely. I think the organizers have been very careful. They have said the stories of the city rather than the histories of the city. You know, you are one of the great raconteurs that I have known. I think, you know, the Devdasi and the Saint, apart from its inspired title, it's a great story.
The title wasn't mine, by the way, it was plagiarized. But anyway.
What is your favorite Chennai story?
I have a couple of favorite Chennai stories, but time permitting, I'll just say one, and then if there is time later, we'll look at the other. See, in the 1870s, we had a lawyer here called Charlib. Charlib went to London and fell in love with a young girl who was studying in a finishing school there, and her name was Mary Ann Dacombe. And then they both get married and they come down here, and he's a lawyer. So he's editing books on law, and then she's reading them. She comes across a book which talks about a woman dying in childbirth in Madras, and then gets to realize that Indian women really don't have any gynecologist, or female gynecologist to go to. So she wants to become a doctor. She approaches the Madras Medical College, which flatly refuses admission. So 3 years she badgers them, finally gets admission, becomes a licensed medical practitioner, and finds that her day begins at 3 a.m. and ends at 11 p.m. every night, because there are so many women to be taken care of in the city. Then she goes to London, where she becomes the first woman MD in the whole world. And then Queen Victoria meets her and says, what is it that you would like to have? She says, I'd like to begin a hospital in Madras city, which is the Victoria Caste and Gosha Hospital, which is today the Kasturba Gandhi Memorial Hospital. But the story doesn't end there. See, in the 1880s, Mary Ann Dacombe is practicing there when one night she is called to a Brahmin home where the fetus is not coming out of a woman who has been in the throes of labor for 2 days or so. And she's going to die any time. So Mary Ann Dacombe uses forceps for the first time in Madras history and delivers the baby. And she uses the forceps with such force that there is a permanent indentation on the baby's forehead for the rest of the baby's life. Now that baby is Sister Subbalakshmi, who went on to reform the entire life of Indian womanhood by widow remarriage and widow rehabilitation and things like that. So if there was no Mary Ann Dacombe, would there be a Sister Subbalakshmi? If there was no Sister Subbalakshmi, would the history of Indian women be what it is today? So there are so many questions like that. Now coming to, and I think I've spoken enough on that, but I'd like to ask you this whole thing about, see, we had, in those days there was no coffee, which is, I think, among my favorite books. I keep it closest to my writing desk because I can always pick it up and read some section out of it. But I found your Songsters of the Crossroads, which is Muchandi Ilakyam, to be an even more entertaining work because it brings to life so many stories of everyday happenings in this city. Would you like to tell me something about what you found in that book?
See, the book Muchandi Ilakyam, the genesis is one word, the word Kujali. I had a teacher, not in my school or college. My teachers in school and college never taught me anything. Like me, I have not taught anything to my students. So there is this term Gujali, which my teacher Tha Kovendan, he always would refer to some editions of books as Gujali Padipu with complete derision. So I asked him, what is this? He said, there is this Gujali bazaar in near Kandakotam, Kandaswamy Koil. There, people would pirate books. The other day, Kannan Sundaram said, there were no pirated books in Tamil publishing. Well, there are lots of pirated books in those days. So this place, they used to specialize in publishing certain kinds of books, and they were called Gujali Padipu. So that term drew me into, as I was reading old books, autobiographies, biographies, this word kept coming up. And then this whole issue of, songsters standing at the crossroads. It could be Mannadi. Chulai was a very important place. There, the songsters would stand. This was at a time when the newspapers had very, very small print runs. Probably Sudhir Sumitran was selling 3,000 copies. And of course, the papers were, usually mailed outside Chennai city. So in that context, message, the stories, the many salacious stories, controversial stories, topical stories, used to be narrated by these songsters.
I can never forget the debate between kerosene oil and coconut oil, with castor oil being the judge in the debate between the two.
Absolutely. So this, very interestingly, these songsters, their repertoire was very wide, much wider than our primetime TV anchors.
Absolutely.
Who are flogging the same story to death. These people had a bag full of songs. Whenever there was any topical issue, immediately they would write a song. If the Emden bombed the city, there would be a song. If there was a strike, they would write a song, lock-up song. If a major political leader was arrested, then there would be a song. The standard fare, of course, was murder.
Yeah, Rajambal Kolai.
Whenever there was a murder, then there would be a song. Most of these songs were in the Sindhu meter. So there was this special form called Kolaichand. And this Kolaichand, these songsters would be at their best. They have to improvise a lot. They would be at their best if it involved neighbors' wives, adulteries. They had a field day. So they
I
would
think
write this.
they are people after our own blood,
Absolutely. we follow in their footsteps. So this is Kolaichand is one. So when there were days when there was nothing of much interest, like the silly season in the British press.
August.
Yes, they would have other things. They would have lullabies. They would have lamentation songs, Opari, Talattu, Nalungupattu, a whole range of things. They would stand at the crossroads and they earned their daily bread by their skill. And you have to remember one thing, these song books, Kalana, Arayana, maximum would be Orana. Kalana was the standard. They were selling to an audience who could not read these books. But still they bought them.
Absolutely. And my favorite among them is your Varinadaichinde, where the man and his sweetheart set out from Mulla Sahib Street and come all the way to Mylapore to participate in the Aravati Mover festival. And one day I walked that entire stretch, 3.5 hours, to trace all the buildings that they mention in that Varinadaichinde. And I was happy to see that there were 75% of those buildings were still standing.
Wait for a few more years.
Yeah, then they'll all be
You
gone.
let the metro destroy all of them.
The day I write, that building is normally demolished. So I will not write about these.
So please don't give ideas to people. So this collection, this was my my favorite form. But you know, how they have survived is a very interesting story. Almost most of the book collectors, they like to collect these songs, but they did not survive. But how they managed to survive is very interesting. It shows the ingenuity of these songsters. Since it's printed on such flimsy paper, and you know, if you flip them 2 or 3 times, it will be completely destroyed. The leftover stock, see what happens is, suppose there is a murder, Kuppubai murder case in Chulai. After a week, nobody is interested because 2 more murders have taken place. So what do you do with them? So the leftover stock, they would bind them together, say 50 or 100 of them, they would call Kolaichindi Thirattu. Or you have this Sillarai Kovai. Sillarai Kovai is basically a hold-all category. All and sundry go into it. So the Sillarai Kovai is bound together. Sometimes it's called Chillarai Kattadam, as in bound. So when they are bound, they tend to survive. The other reason why they survive is, I am sorry to say that our English masters have a better sense of public opinion.
Oh yes, of course.
Than our own masters. For 3 days we have been shouting our throat hoarse about one of our own kindred brother writer and his silencing. There is no reaction.
On the other hand, with the Nagaratnamma case, which happened exactly, the first case of proscribing, 1910, you have all the files intact even now in the Tamil Nadu archives, and you can go there and look at every bit of correspondence of what happened towards the building up of the book. The first sentence being, one prostitute wrote a book and another prostitute edited it. That is how the file really starts.
So the Register of Books very carefully selected many of these texts, and many of them were bought by the British Library. And to this day you find these songs very well preserved. So I wanted to do 2 things. First is to analyze this, to reconstruct the history of these songs. Chennai was the primary locations of both the production and distribution of these chapbooks. Chulai was a very important center. I'll come back to it shortly. And it is, a fitting coincidence that one of the heroes of this Kolaichindis actually dies there. Lakshmi
Yeah,
Kandan.
he's, of course, Lakshmi
Kandan.
And sorry to interrupt you, but that Lakshmi Kantam, the spot of Lakshmi Kantam's murder is really the ideal location to kill anybody even now. Because it's in a place called Madras Street in Veperi, and there is a notorious double bend where it forms an S. And if you are standing in the middle of the double bend, you can't see who's coming behind you or who's coming in front of you. Anything and everything takes you by surprise over there. And that is exactly the spot where the man was knifed. Remarkably intelligent planning of a murder.
Sriram, this is going on record. Okay? So Chulai was one place where, so I tried to reconstruct the world of this publishing. Who wrote these books? How did they print them? Where did they print them? How did they distribute? Who read? Once again, we had to rely on colonial documents. It's a very interesting way in which I was able to collect information on this.
The fact that, the colonial masters surprisingly have always been somewhat more frank than what we are in terms of our history never kind of ceases to intrigue me. There is this point in the middle of Beach Road where if you stand, with your left eye you can see the St. Mary's Church in the fort. It's actually exactly opposite the PWD building. And then with your right, if you look, you can see the Santomed Cathedral at the other end. Both of these have been facing each other for 300 years and more. One a Protestant citadel, the other one a Catholic citadel. One of the earliest recorded stories about Chennai is how the chaplain of the Church of St. Mary's came for a walk, and the Catholics of San Tome kidnapped him and took him away and kept him under arrest in San Tome. So Agent Greenhill, who was the governor of Fort St. George, waited for the chaplain of the St. Thomas Cathedral to come for a walk and kidnapped him and took him and put him inside Fort St. George. Then the chaplain of the San Tome was obviously very clever. He scaled the walls of Fort St. George and escaped. And then they began ransoming the Protestant priest from San Tome, but they found that he'd been put on a ship and sent away to face the Inquisition in Goa. So 2 years later, the man walks back to Madras. Now, all these things are very, very frankly given, which I don't think, given our religious sentiments today, we'd ever record a story like this if one Madhadipati ran away, for instance, and then we found him somewhere else.
Well, of course, there is a whole set of stories about, the heir apparent of Madhadipatis.
Of course.
So you also have the stories of, the institution of Undukati in all the madams. The Madhadipati will not eat before the Undukati has tasted the food. So the stories about Madhadipatis has always been the bread and butter of both songsters and newspapers.
But one of the very nice stories in your book is about the trams and how they kind of brought together the various castes. Would you like to kind of share something with us about that?
I have a couple of tram stories. There are a couple of songbooks on the tramway men's strike, 1920-21. Between 1918, in the wake of the end of the First World War and the acute distress, rising prices, there was grain riots in Chennai. People looted the grain shops. There are songs about that. Laboring men struck work. So there is this great song about the tramway workers. And I also was very surprised to find some songs about the labor leaders. Mm-hmm. And one of them, who was eulogized in the song, goes by the name of T.P. Meenakshi Sundara Gramniyar. Guess who this is?
T.P. Meenakshi Sundara
Gramniyar.
Okay.
This is nobody except, this is Tepo Meenakshi Sundara
Pillai.
Yes. Pavalar's younger brother.
Okay, Krishnasamy
so
Pavalar's
Tepomi, we know of him as a great Tamil scholar, the first Vice Chancellor of Madurai Kamaraj University. He had an earlier career when he played a very important role both in the nationalist movement, was part of the laboring movement, and also was part of the group which attacked Periyar and his group. Some of the most vicious pieces of writing that I've ever read in Desabandhu, just published from Chindadari Pet. So this is.
Do you know? Sorry, just one point. Tracing Tepomi's house was one of the biggest challenges when I did a Chintadri Pet walk. The only man who knew it was a tea kadai owner who was 85 years old and he lived 3 streets away. He showed us the place where the house stood.
It has been destroyed now, demolished.
There is not even a plaque there to say that it was his house. Anyway.
It would be great, if we can have blue plaques all over the city.
Then we'll have a poster stuck on it. Two people urinating in front of it. We don't want that, do we? So.
And then we can, of course, repaint the blue plaques with, a cross, a crescent, and a...
Oh, yes. And say, I will say the Ingi.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. So to continue...
The child has come with a placard.
Yes. So I have 2 tram stories. One tram story concerns Chidambaram Pillai. In 1915, Gandhi comes to Chennai. He had come in 1896. He had spoken here. But in 1915, when he came, with this huge Kataivari turban, he was then at that point very well known. Then Chidambaram Pillai, who is living in Mylapore, writes to Gandhi and tells him, I want to come and see you. So Gandhi says, you can come anytime, I can talk to you. He said, no, I want to talk to you alone. He said, okay, you come. I'll give you 15 minutes on such and such a day. He said, the matter that I want to discuss with you is of great importance, so 15 minutes is not enough. So if that is the case, then you please come to G.A. Nateson's house at 6 in the morning, and I can give you 30 minutes.
Painful man.
Yes. Chidambaram Pillai writes, he said, sir, in my present financial situation, the only mode of communication, commutation I have is the tram.
Tram.
And the first tram starts at 7. So I won't be able to see you at 6 in the morning. And if you remember that, just 5 years earlier, he had bought 2 ships for the price of 17 lakhs of rupees. You will know the poignancy of the story will hit you. The second story is another tram story. Did you know that the trams had some direct connection to the freedom of expression? And I think in the present
Please
context of Perumal Murugan, I think we should remember this. In 1953, the trams came to a stop.
Yeah.
The trams which Pudumai Pittan called the Nagariga action, they came to a stop in 1953. And the tram shed, which is at the corner, which is just opposite the police commissioner's office, that place came up for sale. 2 of the brightest minds with business acumen, Adityanar and G.D. Naidu, got together and bought that plot. And G.D. Naidu told Periyar, you know what, you should buy up this place. Because Periyar always, is a penny pincher. He said, I don't want to spend money. He said, please do buy it. It's a big investment. At that point, Periyar is having a big problem. Wherever he is not able to find a place to speak. St. Mary's Hall was one. The place where, during the late 1940s, the major anti-India agitation meetings
Tamil
were all
Isai
held.
movement.
Tamil
We
Isai
sang
movement
songs
was
on
there.
Pullayar and Murugan in St. Mary's Hall. That is how we got Tamil Isai going. So,
But St. Mary's Hall was having problems because a lot of political meetings are held, so they want to close it down. So there's no place. Wherever he goes and asks for a place, if you are going to do an Astiga Pracharam, we won't give you this place. So Periyar buys up that place in 1953-54. 3 years later, he uses a bulldozer to, clean up the place. It had become overgrown. They have a major conference. And then he opens a hall. It is named for M.R. Radha, which is once again very interesting because M.R. Radha's place have a direct relationship with the control of ideas. The Madras Dramatic Performances Act
was passed essentially
to
curtail his place.
Silence one person. Okay, so this man, appropriately enough, he funds him and he opens this hall. And Periyar says, in this place, whoever pays money can come and speak here. If you want to abuse me also, you can come and speak here. You rent the hall. He said, now I am paying money, I want to express my views. I suppose, that would be...
My favorite tram story is the Veena Dhanamal story where everybody had to listen to her performances in absolute silence. At 8 p.m. the gun would blow from Fort St. George to indicate that it was 8 p.m. Last tram would leave in 10 minutes.
Danda Sotarama, Gundu Pota Vada.
Exactly. And she would say, Jnana Sunyo, ellaru ezhundindu poidala ipo. Because those who don't have any jnanam or appreciation of music, you can all leave because I know you have to go home. So nobody would get up and leave because they'd be terrified of the old lady.
So I don't think we have the danger of people leaving now at this moment because I think there's a more interesting performance following this talk. But I'm sure lots of people will have lots of stories rather than questions. But let us have very, very short stories.
I think questions are better than stories. We'll wait for them to
We'll
go.
have only one story then. So perhaps some kind of Kafkaesque micro stories we can have. Well, that is the quickest way to disperse this crowd. If I sing, this crowd will be dispersed. You may want to sing Sriram.
I don't remember, I have not learnt any of those songs by heart. But the point is that just brings to my mind just one thing, that we keep talking about the history of this city from 1639 onwards. But prior to 1639, from the 5th century and the 6th century and the 7th century, there are so many descriptions of Mylapore and Tiruvattriyur and Triplicane and Tirunirmalai and other places in our Tevaram, in our Nalayara Divya Prabandham, in Arunagirinathars, Tirupugal, that it is a pity that nobody is looking at all that to find out how this city was at that point of time. And perhaps that will give us a better idea of how the city evolved, rather than saying that on 22nd August 1639, suddenly a city came out of nothing and people began to inhabit it. So, where is that Mailai that Thirugnana Sambandar speaks about? Where is that Thiruvallikeni that, the Alvar speak about? So I think it would be a good idea if somebody begins to look at the vernacular writing and then tries to translate that and bring it out into the public view.
Sriram, your second favorite story about Madras. You said only one.
The second one was about the Padris, the two boring Padris. The one about, there is just one more. The police commissioner, not the current one, so we don't want trouble there.
It's not Bhavanandam Pillai.
Edward Elliot, after whom that road was named. Even now old Mylapurians, 5 minutes. Old Mylapurians will even now say, I lived on Edward Elliot's road. They'll never say Radhakrishnan road. But anyway, so this Edward Elliot was the police commissioner of Madras. And on a particular day, a married woman, Mrs. Isabella Napier, set forth in a carriage from St. George's Cathedral, drove up to the Marina Beach, turned right, and then went all the way to Adyar to Edward Elliot's house and said hereafter she was going to live with him. And the two of them lived happily there, much to the delight of everybody except Mrs. Napier's husband, who immediately took the matter to court. So before the divorce was settled, Mrs. Napier had given birth to one more baby. And then, the sleeping arrangements of Napier, Mrs. Napier and Mr. Edward Elliot's were brought into question. So, servants like Veerata Aya, Gafoor the butler, and Munsami the Thannikaran, etc., they were all brought in and they were investigated. And then finally the matter went to the House of Commons, which had to decide on divorces over here. And finally the divorce was decreed, and it was said that Mr. Napier can get married to whoever he wants to, but Edward Elliot cannot marry Isabella. But Edward Elliot's father was the governor of Madras. So the rules were all changed to suit him, and so the two of them were married and they lived happily ever after. Now this road is named after this particular character who, the road where the woman ran in that horse carriage is actually named after him. So somebody must have had a sense of humor when they gave it that name. Ironically enough, it was named after Dr. Radhakrishnan, a very learned man. But when you read Sarvapalli Gopal, I don't have to say anything more. There was a certain continuity in history.
I think you are offending people.
Yeah.
So I have a story. It's a very offensive story. There is a play called Dambachari Vilasam.
Of course.
Okay. I mentioned the 1954 Dramatic Performances Act. The earlier one was the 1876 Act, and it had something to do with this Dambachari Vilasam. Dambachari is this great fop. He's a son of a rich man. He comes to Chennai, stays in Tiruvattriyur, Chindadripet, and has a gala time. Reading it, I was very, very jealous of him. So, and this book, which Kasi Viswanatha Mudaliyar, Saidapuram Kasi Viswanatha Mudaliyar.
This is not Tusi Rajagopala Bhupati.
No, that is even more interesting and even more tempting, if I may say so. So, Saidapuram Kasi Viswanatha Mudaliyar writes this Dambachari Vilasam. It has some great passages. There are, prostitutes, pimps, daubers, everybody is there. Salacious songs are there. And somebody enacts this as a play. Immediately, the British colonial masters is the height of the Victorian age, so they are aghast at this. So they put 2 or 3 policemen on it. So, and then finally a case is brought forward, and the judge, what he says in 1876? He says it's very clear that lots of people have gone there, paid money, watched it, and they enjoyed it and were not offended at all. But it looks like the policemen were sent to be offended, and they have done their job very well. I cannot help it. Perhaps we have a lesson.
Precedent in that.
We have a lesson in it.
Yeah.
If something is offensive, let us not read it, rather than going and stopping others from reading
Absolutely. Thank you. I think so. Oh, we have one more.
One more. Actually, I was 10 when I came across all these college Hindus. I never missed one. In every Shandy day in Tiruvannamalai, 2 people will come and sing to their own tune. All will assemble there. Actually, it was scintillating and soul-stirring.
When was this? Which period are you talking?
Some 70 years back. 70 years back, actually. Are the books available now? Actually, we want to have a darshan of them. Can we buy them? Can we see them? Can this generation see this book and read at least once?
Chalapathy's book has got a compilation of some of them as an appendix to the main book.
Right.
That is a good compilation, but I think the Roja Muttaya Research Library has the finest collection of the Varinadates in this today in India.
Yeah, probably somebody can pick up this tune and see if there are somebody who can still sing it and we can record it. I remember once again there is a Tiruchengodu and Perumal Murugan keep coming up again and again. In Tiruchengodu, there was a Kavingar, Umayampatti, Kandasamy Kavingar, who once sang these songs to me 25 years ago. In those days we didn't have the technology, at least I didn't have access to this technology to record them. I think, if this inspires others to compile more stories, I think that would be
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.